2, 1.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 33rd edition of Data Bites, getting things done with data in government, brought to you this month by the continuous cavalcade of chaos that is British politics. I'm Gavin Freegard, Associate at the Institute for Government, and it's wonderful to welcome so many of you in person and online this evening for our first event under our third UK Prime Minister since we started this series back in April 2019. Let's start in the usual way. Hands up if you've been to Data Bites before. Welcome back. Hands up if this is your first Data Bites. Welcome. And hands up if you've been invited to serve in the new government. I won't be offended if any of you have to step out and take a call. She could do a lot worse. Let's start with the usual housekeeping. Tonight's event is on the record and we are being live streamed, obviously. For those of you on social media, it's hashtag IFG Data Bites and we are live tweeting from @IFG Events. If you're here in the building, the Wi-Fi is IFG Internet Hotspot, password Institute123, all lowercase. And as ever, I'll be putting your questions to our speakers. If you're watching online, use the Slido page you're almost certainly already on. If you're not, go to bit.ly/SlidoDB33. I promise it'll work this month. If you're here at the IFG, you can, of course, raise your hand. Why does the IFG organise Data Bites? Well, we aim to bring together the various different data communities in and around government to show everyone, including those who don't think of themselves as data people, what better data can achieve in practice, and to put interesting data projects on the record so we can all learn from them. How does Data Bites work? You're going to see 4 presentations about data this evening. Each presentation will last for 8 minutes. Yes, just 8 minutes. There are 8 bits in a byte, hence 8 minutes in a data byte. The presenter will then face questions for 8 minutes, yes, just 8 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next presentation, so 4 presentations of 8 minutes, each followed by questions for 8 minutes. This is our 33rd Data Bites. You can watch the previous 32 on the IFG website. So what's happened since we last met? Well, it's been a long summer. 84 years is also the average age of the Tory party membership. It's not. But we have a new Prime Minister. Not him. Not her either. But her. Liz Truss comes into office with more government experience than almost any other recent Prime Minister. Only Gordon Brown had more, and all of that was in the Treasury, while Truss has sampled several different departments. A bit like a fast stream for Prime Ministers, for those of you who remember the fast stream. It was while she was at DEFRA, overseeing the success of Open DEFRA, which opened up lots of data and put it at the heart of the organisation, that she gave a speech here at the IFG about reforming government. Good to know that she's a fan, at least until she's watched this. Truss has, of course, just appointed her first cabinet. You can follow all the moves on the IFG's live blog. There's been lots of positive discussion about diversity. Truss is our 3rd female PM. For the first time, none of the great offices of state are held by a white man. And we have our first female Deputy Prime Minister, Therese Coffey, also our new Health Secretary. Though her choice for Chief Medical Officer seems a tad unconventional, I'm not sure Dr. Dre is a clinician. But there's more to do on diversity when it comes to education, according to the Sutton Trust. More than 2/3 of the cabinet are privately educated, compared to around 7% of the population. Truss's cabinet clear-out is slightly less dramatic than some previous transitions of Prime Minister, particularly Boris Johnson's transition from Theresa May, the Knight of the Blonde Knives. But Truss's takeover nonetheless heralds a lot of departures, moves and new faces. Some departments have had more turnover than others. Top of that particular table is DCMS, the Ministry of Fun and Fundamentals, as it grapples with major legislation on data protection and internet regulation. Michelle Donnellan, whose 2-day tenure as Education Secretary was the shortest cabinet stint in history, is the 11th Secretary of State at DCMS since May 2010. Fittingly for the department responsible for sport, that's enough for a football team. Not a very good one, they're all on the right wing. And judging by the turnover, not one of them is a keeper. And while we're on football and personnel changes, Chelsea parted company with their manager Thomas Tuchel today, their 11th manager in the same time period. According to my IFG colleagues, Tuchel's tenure, which started in January 2021, took in 2 Prime Ministers, 3 Chancellors, 3 Culture Secretaries and 5 Education Secretaries. Admittedly, those statistics would be less dramatic if he'd quit just a couple of days earlier, though if he had, he'd probably be Secretary of State for Northern Ireland right now. A big unresolved question is the role that will be played by one of the recent dominant forces in government, squatting like a giant toad across British politics, now that Liz Truss has taken over. Yes, what will happen to the IFG's ministerial resignations chart? Now, fans of Data Bytes will know it's been a long time since we sonified some data, that is, turned data into something approximating music. So here's a sonification of our ministerial resignation chart. Each beat you hear represents the start and end of a year in a particular premiership. Each ascending note is a resignation outside a reshuffle in that year. You should hopefully hear the difference between the steady stream under most PMs and then May and Johnson. So let's start with Thatcher. Here we go. Great. There really can be... Thank you. There really can be only one verdict on Johnson having lost so many ministers because of concern about standards and ethics in his government.
That is a disgrace.
Turning to tonight, our first presentation will come from Claire Edington, Head of Data Portfolio at the Central Digital and Data Office, on CDDO's strategic roadmap for data. Then we'll hear from Alexis Castillo-Soto, Deputy Director for Digital and Data in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, on its data management service. Joining us virtually will be Anna Price, Statistics Regulator and Health and Social Care Lead at the Office for Statistics Regulation, on reproducible analytical pipelines in government. And our final speaker this evening will be Matt Curlog, former Head of Data Innovation at Cabinet Office Analysis and Insight, on 3 things he's learned about being a data person in government. We'll be back on Wednesday, the 5th of October, then the 1st of November, a Tuesday rather than our usual Wednesday, and then the 7th of December. Tonight's Data Bytes is unusual, not in terms of my introduction being rewritten up to the last moment, since that's just how British politics is now, but in not having a sponsor. We need sponsors to keep the series going. If you'd like your name up in lights and to get a speaking slot, get in touch with my colleague Pritesh. And if you're in government and would like to present, or know someone who should, get in touch with me. That's more than enough from me this evening, so it's my pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Claire.
Thanks, Gavin. Let me get some slides.
They'll come up in a second.
Great. I'll just start talking. Or do we wait? Oh, I can't stop for the timer. Is that cheating?
We won't hold it against you if you do.
We can get going. I'm Claire Edington. It's great to be here. I'm from the data team in the Central Digital and Data Office, and we are part of the Cabinet Office. And we're headed up by Interim Chief Data Officer Sue Bateman, and we collaborate with data specialists across government, and it's about making sure that standards and guidance are available to support all civil servants to share and use government data better. And we work across the CDDO organisation as well to set strategy for the whole span of digital and technology, of which data is just one part. And we set out to make the whole system vibrate. So it's about working with data leaders, data specialists across government organisations within our policy reach to make those shared aims a reality. So in my remaining 7 minutes and something seconds, I will hopefully give you a sense of what we're doing, what we say we're going to do, and how we are going to get there. There we go. This is a tale of two strategies. And there was already a strategy at the party before Transforming for a Digital Future came along earlier this year. And this OG is, of course, the National Data Strategy, or the NDS. And without those intentions set out in September 2020, we wouldn't be here. And Mission 3 of the strategy, which is about government's use of data, set out 30 actions for data foundations across government, which sit with us in the Cabinet Office. And until recently, this Mission 3, there's another Mission 3 coming. They're both called Mission 3. Doesn't make my job complicated at all. It's formed the primary focus for our delivery, and we found it's been a really great hook so far for that cross-government working, for those foundational actions needed for us to lead at the centre since we launched the strategy with DCMS back in 2020. And some of the work that, some of the work we've done so far, there's all sorts of things, and I can't call them all out on one slide, and we'll make these available afterwards. But it includes just some of the highlights. We created the Data Standards Authority and the strategy for that was published on gov.uk last year. The work we've done with the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation on the Algorithmic Transparency Standard, Data Bytes 25. And the Data Sharing Governance Framework, which was Data Bytes 27. See, I did my footnoting. And we've also done work on the Data Sharing Governance Framework, which we've had, the Data Sharing Playbook, which is where we're helping to troubleshoot some of the most complex data sharing cases in government with expert support from the centre. So in March this year, we had a stock take of the actions, and this is what we found. I nearly did a slide that did a visualisation of this and realised it's basically 2/3 are either completed or closed. It's a bit like if you were going to have two friends around for a cake and one of them didn't come and you ate their bit, you'd have eaten that many actions. It's been really great to just take stock of the process, because I think so often with these things we let them just rumble on and then another strategy comes in and we never really think about what we did. So it's really important to me and to the team that we're taking stock and thinking, some of those are closed, and that's, a bit controversial to say we didn't tick them off, but sometimes things change. That's the right thing to do. And it's some of those things, it's because we've built onto new and better things that are more aligned. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's another strategy to come. So we know that a strategic plan for data won't change digital government on its own any more than a strategic plan for service design or tech architecture or legacy IT. So in June as CDDO, we published Transforming for a Digital Future. This is the government's 2022 to 2025 roadmap for digital and data. This isn't the only strategic show in town. We get other visitors to our list of strategic goals from time to time from the National Audit Office. We had one from the Digital Economy Council, Treasury Committee minutes, as well as, maybe some emergent priorities when ministers join our department and look at data and go, I'm sure there's something we could do about data sharing in government. This really is our attempt as a relatively new organisation in CDDO to bring things together across that whole digital system, and it's the keystone of our strategic plans to 2025. But I'll let you in on a secret, which is that I'm not a lifer in the civil service, and I know we're going to hear some reflections from Matt later on. And everyone who knows me knows that I really love clarity, and I'm called Claire, and that's all quite neat. And simple doesn't mean easy. It's not about making things easier, but it's about focus. And I don't like that there are two data strategies in play at the moment. I don't like that there's a national data strategy and there's Transforming for a Digital Future, which has got data in there at the end, roadmap for digital and data. And I'm head of data portfolio, so it is my job to bring some clarity to the situation and say, well, how do we do it? So they are great strategies. This isn't to say they're not both great. They absolutely are. But I wanted to say a bit about what this means for national data strategy, not just to go, oh, great, we've got a new one, so what? And how we're organising our portfolio delivery going forward to keep that clear focus on what's really important. But also, how do we fetch everyone to do that? So Yes, the National Data Strategy has laid some great foundations for a common understanding of the challenges government organisations face when it comes to data. And with the new strategy, the NDS doesn't become dormant and it doesn't become superseded, but instead, this new strategy gives us that next focused arc of actions that will get us to 2025. And it turns out we're quite adept at naming strategies. We do quite a lot in the Cabinet Office. So transforming for a digital future does what it says on the tin, a transformed, more efficient digital government to provide better outcomes for everyone. And in the strategy, we set out what we think the conditions for success will look like, though doubtless they'll have changed by 2025. So I can see the timer ticking. So whistle-stop tour. You've got transformed public services, you've got one login, you've got better data, another mission 3. Why did we not give it another number? I do not know. Secure, efficient and sustainable technology, skills, massively important right across the system, and then the system itself, what are those systemic things that will help us unlock digital transformation? Nothing is siloed and everything is important for success. So what's the plan? The data part, it's about better data to power decision making. You can hop onto Google and find the strategy, read about how we call on departments for some actions, and we've co-created this with departments and organisations. But I'm here to talk about the plan for data. This will be available afterwards, so you can put it under your pillow and read it to your heart's content. But essentially, we think there's probably 4 steps to take, and like all good strategic plans, things get vaguer as they get into the rear view, or the horizon, the bit over there. Because we're not there yet, and so we'll get sharper as we get down the road. But first off, it's about defining the strategy. Tick. Hidden in the small print there's some stuff around creating community and governance to succeed, and that's really important because doing this is about people and about bringing people together around our purpose. That second one, it's where we are right now. It's about consensus, and that word foundations again. And I feel a bit sorry for the word foundations here, because it's really quite a meaty bit of work that's really going to get us into stages 3 and 4 in the right place. And what it really means is bringing people together to agree what we mean about things like data criticality and data ownership, and establishing data architecture principles. We get to stage 3, we put focus on metadata there. It's probably not entirely fair. There'll be an awful lot going on. But it's about, we've done the work to agree how catalogues and standards are going to, operate, and this is really getting that to happen, and it's why it's important to do it, and getting the metadata requirements in place. And then at the end, on this bit of adventure over on the end of the road, what we're agnostically calling a data marketplace, this is really where we see things coming together. And as you'll know, there's a number of data sharing initiatives across government, including ONS's integrated data service, our work with GDS on the government data exchange. Who knows what else we'll be talking about in a couple of years' time. But for us in CDDO, it means that we'll have helped facilitate some of that interoperability across government that we're looking for. There's a slide about governance in the pack, but I knew I was never going to get this in the 8 minutes. That's about fetching everyone. If you're as nerdy as I'm about portfolio management, you're also probably nerdy about governance. So if you want to ask me in the Q&A about why it's important we fetch everybody, how we're doing that across government, I hope if you're from government in the room, you recognise some of these bodies, and we have representatives from your organisations. If not, come chat to me afterwards. It's really important. Lots of acronyms and stuff, but I just wanted to put that up there to demonstrate how we see our different bits of governance around this coming together. So it is about fetching everyone, and hopefully this shows you that we've got a plan. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. Do you think about your questions? I'll come to the in-the-building audience second this time around, because I will go to the virtual audience first. For those of you online, you can use the Slido to submit your questions. If you're not already on the Slido page, it's bit.ly/SlidoDB33. So I'll start with a big question that's come in online, Claire, from Sam from Med Confidential. Evening to you, Sam. I thought somebody would ask this one. What do you expect to change under the new Prime Minister, and what already has?
Wow. There's a lot that I can't say, I think, because I'd like a job. The job that I've got is great, thank you. I mean, this will be a cop-out. I mean, it was always going to be a cop-out, wasn't it? But we're really focused on data in government, and working with organisations on the way that they're set up to manage the data capability in their organisation. What people have they got, and how is data helping them, do the things that they set out to do? Data in and of itself is a lot of us really enjoy it, but it's there to help us do other stuff better and deliver better services, and do all the other things that we do for citizens. So, priorities change with new ministers, don't they? But all stay the same, and we're still doing our best to get behind that within organisations.
Great, thank you. I'll come to the audience in the building next. Wait for the mic to come from you to you. Keep it short, and do tell us who you are if you can. But remember, you are on the record. We've got a question there. I'll come to you next time round.
Hi, Ben Hawes. I'm wondering about local government, the local public sector. What are you doing to make sure that they get comparable help? Previous waves of government digital transformation have focused rather heavily on central government departments, and much less has been made available, I think, even though local public sector is the services people use most.
Just to say as well, I've got a question from Juliet Whitworth online, which is exactly that as well. To what extent do you involve local government in your programmes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we often get a similar question about bigger organisations that are not considered part of the centre, for example, the NHS. The unhelpful answer is it's not always within our gift with the scope that we're given within our organisation. The more helpful answer is there are things that we are doing to build community across government, and a lot of the frameworks and standards that we set, like the data sharing governance framework, for example, contain lots of best practice and ways to do things. And the data ethics framework is another example of that, that are of benefit to organisations inside and outside of the public sector.
Thanks. Let's stay in the room. We'll go to you next.
Hi, I'm Vincenzo Rampula. I wanted to pick up on just something you said around helping departments do what they want to do with data. And I just wondered, to what extent have they got a plan or an idea of what they want to do with data? Just finished a stint at Bayes, which was looking at something called smart data, which is about personal data sharing. And I think one of the things the majority of stakeholders were crying out for is access to public data, but a lot of departments didn't seem to have thought through how that could happen, what might happen, stuff like that. So who's helping them think through that strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we work with different departments and organisations across government, we see different levels of maturity. And you might have one department that's very strong in the data capability in their organisation, but there might be one aspect of that is less mature. So one of the things we're putting in place is a data maturity matrix to help organisations helping them to work out where they're at and what the gaps might be, and also what gaps are important to them. With their mission, they might not need a certain aspect of that. But yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's one of the things that we're really keen to do is grow a community, not just a community on Slack and kind of lunch and learns and things, but also the Chief Data Officers Council isn't just there to provide a bit of governance around stuff. It's so that there's a peer group and visibility across that matrix, across government, so that a rising tide can bring all boats with it.
Excellent. I'll go online next for our first anonymous question of the evening. Good evening to you, Anonymous. They say, colleagues in DHSC face similar questions, and their solution, or their ALB solution, is to spend 360 million or more on Palantir. Any thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I could say that every department is its own organisation with its own approach and strategy for how it spends its money. I think there's, skills is so important, and my colleagues in the DDAT capability, digital data technology capability team in CDDO, do some amazing work to help build that and support government departments to build capability in-house. Skills is a real issue in the sector at the moment. It's not, that's no secret. It's not breaking news. So there is a challenge, and we need to deliver at pace for people. So I think there'll always be a balance there.
Thanks. We've got a question there, and then I've got one down the front and another one down the front. So, yeah.
I think you met me, Gavin. Thanks. Akash Pound from Institute for Government. So building on the questions you've had already about working with local government, I was similarly interested in the extent to which, or whether at all, there was engagement with the devolved administrations. it being a sort of common refrain of IFG and other reports that both cooperation around policy making and standardization and sharing of data could certainly be improved across the 4 nations.
Yeah, it's really important. And in fact, we had our Devolved Administration Advisory Forum for the National Data Strategy today. So it's a great time to ask the question. And again, it's about the things that we don't touch with the policies that we set and our boundaries, but it is about everyone's welcome in the community. So we have a lot, there's, in the standards and frameworks that we set, sometimes there's a lot that colleagues across borders can take from that, but also we have loads to learn. And in terms of data sharing across those boundaries, it gets trickier. The more boundaries we have to cross, the better we all get at examining those boundaries, getting sometimes braver in line with the risk around data sharing. And I know it's a conversation. I know data leaders across government have a lot. I don't see people burying their head in the sand. I just see people wanting to make more data sharing happen where it's the right thing to do. And it's trickier across those boundaries. But I think, there's good relationships there at our level about sharing what works and staying in touch and making sure that everyone can benefit where there's things to benefit from.
Great, thank you. I want to get the final 2 from the audience in. So this front row first, and we'll come to you next. So please keep things short.
I'll try being quick. I'm Catherine Purster. Until recently, I was head of data strategy at the Department for Work and Pensions. I think the CDDO has brought great new impetus to what's already been quite a long and challenging journey, but you alluded to some of the challenges that sit around the fact that separation of data strategy that sits with DCMS and CDDO and also, of course, GDS. I wondered if you could, in the last few seconds, reflect a little bit on the benefits and drawbacks of having those 3 separate organisations focused on the next stage of data strategy.
Really happy to, and let's talk more after, because my role sits absolutely the crux of that. And why do we need a head of data portfolio in CDDO? We might not have a head of something else portfolio, because the data policy landscape has all of these different bits, and because government's use of data, as distinct to the rest of the national data strategy with DCMS, is internal to government and a bit less shiny sometimes and things, but there's loads to do. And yeah, CDDO is a really young organisation, April last year, still forming that identity, having been plucked from GDS, but we also have identities from other places like knowledge, information, records management. And it's about, how do we make the most of the synergies and all the things that we know, but also it's about clarity and it's about scope. And the number of people who email me and they get a response from me saying, this is about government's use of data, please talk to DCMS. And it's the most helpful thing sometimes to go, there is a purpose to our structure, so if we stick to it, we can really focus on what matters.
Very quick question, very quick answer.
Service standard doesn't actually consider data all that much. It doesn't ask service owners to think about data architecture and the role of data science at the start of building services. Do you know if that's going to be looked at?
Great question, and give me your email and I'll get you an answer. That's a good short answer, isn't it?
I did say short, that was perfect. Well, Claire, thank you very much indeed. And sorry to those of you online whose excellent questions I didn't have time to ask. Our next speaker is Alexis.
Hello, everyone. Managed to navigate getting there and not falling down, so I feel happy. So I'm going to talk to you about the data management service. So this is a service that we've actually built, we've used, and we will pick up the point about BASE later on, but we will cover it because it's actually one of the first things that I wanted to sort of cover for ourselves, which is we don't have a joined-up approach. And I will guarantee that most departments, most offices, or if I asked you all individually, both in the room and virtually, can you describe what data means? I'd get a different answer. And that's probably the first challenge. We all have a different interpretation of what data is. We all have different ways of analyzing data. And ultimately, data is part of a service. So we have different service owners. So they interpret their data in a different way. And one of the big things, or one of the challenges when I came to BASE was, and again, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new here, there's been multiple data strategies, as I'm sure there have been in your organizations. The challenge is, how do you make it come to life? That was our big challenge. And actually, I took I was told, a strange approach, which is a nice, polite way in the civil service to say you're crazy, of not writing a strategy at the start. Because the hardest thing was trying to convince people and winning hearts and minds when it came to data. So we took a different approach. And one of the big things that we started to look at was that actually consensus is really difficult to build when you talk at a high level. Actually, consensus when you talk about something small is quite easier to get to. And actually, so we took a reverse approach. We started to look at different ways. So I'll highlight some of our project objectives. One of the key things that we wanted to do was, people like talking about data. People like talking about the shiny stuff, the AI, the ML. Wouldn't it be great? It's going to fix everything. It's not. It's going to tell you how bad your data is. But you don't want to know that. So actually, let's go and look at some different technology that will tell me that they're actually going to give me the right piece. And one of the key things that I started out was we actually stopped talking about data. We actually turned that around and said, what's the service? What is it? What's your outcome? What do you want to deliver? Let us worry about the data, not because it's not important, but because we have to take you on a journey. And the journey is both from a technical perspective and also from a understanding of data. One of the key things that we looked at as well was that people started to worry, the data hoarders. I'm sure, again, this expression is not new. It's my data. I don't want to share it. I know what it does. But if you ask them to explain what their data does, 9 out of 10 people probably couldn't, because someone else did it and they inherited it, but they know it's right. What do you use it for? Well, I've been using it, and now I've added more data. So actually, one of the key things that we started to think about was data lineage. That confuses most of our colleagues straight away. Well, what do you mean? So we started to remove the conversation from data and data lineage. All the things that we know that are important to those of us that do like data, maybe passionately, but actually trying to describe it in a different way. So we took the approach. This won't seem strange to you. In fact, some would call this ETL, but not described as ETL. Why was that important? It was extremely important because we needed to take them on that journey to understand the differences of the data that they had and actually what they wanted to deliver. Because, again, there was a good chance that what they wanted to deliver, they didn't have the right data for in the first place. So actually, it was always going to be doomed for failure unless we took them to understand why data was really important. So we looked at some of the areas, and we looked at, again, took a different approach, took a punt, and invested some money ourselves into areas where there were challenges. There was this thing that happened a few years ago. I don't know if you remember it. It was called COVID. It's been in the press. Don't know if you've forgotten about it. And one of the key things was, as a department, we did loads of loans. And actually went to local authorities. And local authorities always had that challenge of how did they return the data to us. But the challenge was always seen as local authorities don't return the right data to us. We can't produce the right data, so we'll write something on top of the data that we received. Okay, that gives you an answer, but actually probably not the right thing. So we took a different approach. We started to look at actually what did the teams want, and actually how did people use our services. So we did this thing called user research, again, digital. We took that approach to look at and ask some people about what their challenges were. We developed a very, very simple conceptual architecture. This is as technical as we got with our teams. The reason behind that was that as soon as we started talking here, everyone started losing themselves in what they meant. So I'll guarantee, depending on what technology you use, you're looking for Python. Why isn't our Shiny there? Why isn't that there? And what we found was actually, didn't matter what we put up there, people tried to make constructive builds on it, is what I would call it. But we all know what they were looking for is my bit isn't there. So we looked at different ways of trying to get them to understand it. So we then changed our approach to that. So we used this process for our local authorities, which was they would log in, they would upload the data, and based on the user research, we actually found out that the reason they couldn't provide some local authorities, not all, I might add, had challenges with actually providing the data to us because they had another system. So how could we help them help us? One of the key things we started was actually doing an automated check at the front. Not an automated check saying, your data's wrong. Line 52, cell 4, that's wrong. So we were able to give local authorities that ability. Now, we launched that. Guess what? No one used it. No one realized that until they started using it more regularly. And then we were very clear about not pushing stuff because we wanted actually local authorities to tell each other rather than us telling them you could use this. But we did it on one specific loan. We did it on one specific journey. Because guess what? They came back and said, well, actually, you need to build this. You need to build that. And never before had we had that information because we started to listen to what they were doing and actually build it iteratively because we started small. We're on phase 2 of our roadmap. I won't bore you with it because you'll see the slides. But there are a couple of things that I wanted to say that were really important that I wanted to bring out. The data conversation, the nodding dogs. How many times have you been in a room talking about data and everyone's doing that? Yeah, I really understand that. And what we found were, particularly with non-data literate people, is they didn't want to be embarrassed about not knowing data. So we didn't talk about data. We talked about the service, we talked about the outcome, we talked about what they needed or what they wanted. And actually we started, because we built it slow, we built up some of those services and got really good at some stuff. And then we're able to cookie cutter all of that approach into new services. So our delivery time frame got smaller and smaller and smaller because we were able to build components. Wasn't right all the time. I'm sure you'll see this with all other people. Data governance, the process, how do you get people to agree stuff? Skills, I'm sure all of us are going to mention data skills. But it's both. It's data skills and data education from our perspective. We have the capability to build all this stuff. And the last thing I'd say, because I've run out, is the tech bit is probably the easiest bit. It's the fleshy humans that get in the way. That's it.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Just a reminder to those of you watching us online, you can put your questions to Alexis via Slido. If you're not already there, it's bit.ly/SlidoDB33. You'll all be saying that with me by the end of the event. I'm going to go to our audience in the room first this time. So who would like to ask the first question? A few of you are definitely thinking about it. We've got a question here.
Patrick King, CGI. Just curious to understand why you selected Azure and the Microsoft stack over what else is on the market.
Why not was our approach. We had the opportunity to look at the tech, and we never had that discussion with our colleagues. We think that there are a number of technologies at work. There are a number of service providers that do the job. Our biggest challenge was trying to get our colleagues to understand data. So the tech bit, you could swap that out with somebody else, whether it's AWS, whether it's something else. But for me, that's probably the bigger challenge. It's actually taking them on the journey. We didn't go in and start saying, well, this bit's better than that bit. We just said they need the service.
Thanks. Next question, I'll stay in the room. Yes.
Hi, Haroon here from Maytech. Is there a reason you didn't follow sort of a GDS discovery type approach, or did you?
We did. We did take a discovery approach. We did, in effect, deliver it as an agile project from a digital perspective. What we were keen to do was not deliver it as a data project. We were very key and to manage our colleagues was to get feedback from other people that were using the service. Ultimately, within our department, we use data, but that data isn't necessarily ours. It's provided to us, whether it's free, whether we pay for it, or whether someone gives us that data. And if you don't know how they are going to provide the data to you, doesn't matter what we do at this end if we don't understand that journey. So it was really important for us to take that sort of digital services approach rather than taking a data approach.
Thanks. We'll stay in the room, I think. Anyone want to ask a question? We'll have a follow-up.
You're going to test my answer.
Sorry, I'm just keen. No, it's not knowledge. I think what I'm wondering is you've done really good work there, clearly. You sort of concentrate on the users rather than the data, and just keeping that out of the room is really important. From my perspective, I'm just thinking about, okay, you've done a really good thing. How does it scale? How do you scale up? Especially when you said, there's a skills gap, and there's data literacy issues, there's governance issues, all those things. As base, how do you plan on scaling this?
So we have more demand than we can deliver on. Right? That's our biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge isn't necessarily sometimes the money. It's actually how you use the money in the correct way to enable you to build out. So obviously we've picked a cloud technology, so scale isn't a problem for us. Ingestion isn't a problem for us. We've looked at some of our new policies that have been announced, some that haven't, and how do we get the data from third parties. So all of that capability is now there. That's the huge advantage. Before, we didn't have that capability to connect. And we're not saying we are the only answer. We're saying we're part of the ecosystem. That's the difference. We're not saying thou shalt use this service. We're saying we are part of the ecosystem that will enable you to deliver your service. And just coming back to a previous point about which technology is better, it doesn't matter. It's about getting the data and making sure you have the right data to make the right choices.
Anonymous online is interested if you think that something like data steward training or similar might be useful alongside software stack.
Absolutely. I think the biggest challenge with that is explaining what that means to people. People run away from being owners of services until it goes wrong because they want to blame someone else. The ownership or the stewardship means you have to invest your time. And that, I would argue, is probably one of the biggest challenges, is understanding the worth of the product that you have to enable you to go, actually, this is quite important, I have to invest in it. It's no longer a spreadsheet that sits in a corner on some file. It's actually bigger than that.
Thanks. I'll come back to the room for the next one. I've got one there.
Thanks, Julian McRae. Sorry. I'm just interested in governance. You came up a few times in your comments. How does the governance structure work, both for yourselves, but also in the rest of the department, about the quality of the analysis and the work they're doing, drawing on those data services?
Sure. So we have built Slow. So we've used the business process in effect to manage our governance because we're using simple services. What we are now merging into is actually going, why do you have something different when this works? So that's always been the biggest challenge. Whenever we've got into a room, particularly when you talk about data, is how do you name something? Is it a capital? Isn't it a capital? Is it an underscore? Well, I use it this way. But once you have a live service, that was the thing that was the winner for us. Something tangible that people could see and are using changes that whole sort of process for us. Because we're no longer talking about the theory. We're going, well, here's a service, it's working. If you just did this and tweaked yours, you could have the service nearly free, I would say. Not free, but nearly free, and quicker and more effective and more efficient. Why would you say no? Some people do, by the way, but you know.
Thanks. We've got a question from James. Good evening to you, James. How have you managed engagement across other departments, agencies, and wider organisations to build confidence in data sharing?
So we are fortunate within Bays that within the DDAT functions, our CDIO has a network. So we talk to all of our CDIOs that range from the Met Office and others. And we have basically said, here's what we've done. It could work for you, or you can use this as a service. Ultimately, we are not there to sort of force you to go down that route. It is really important that people understand the value. That's the important bit, not the data bit, the value of why it makes sense to come through here. So we've done a number of engagements. We've offered it to a number of our partner orgs, which will remain nameless. But also, we're not interested in your data in hosting or processing. We just want to access it to do what we need to do to get the answer that we need, but also have the understanding of how we came to the answer. That's important to us. The data lineage and how we got to that conclusion is more important than hosting all the data.
Thanks. We've got another question online from Vinod. When you start from the users, how do you ensure that matches the policy and strategy set by the people higher up?
It doesn't. Quite frankly, it doesn't. And, you know, I'm not telling anything, you all giggled in the room. It is fact. You know, sometimes we all go away and think the what if, because it's theoretical. And actually, most of the time when you engage a user, it doesn't matter if it's a data service or a digital service, they tell you they do something a certain way, but you sit and watch them and you go, you're not doing what you tell me you say how you work. The key thing is being adaptive and showing the reasoning. And that's the big thing. It's not saying we're changing the what, it's how. We're changing the how, not the what. So the outcome's the same, but how we deliver it is different.
Great. Final 30 seconds, I'll take a final question from in the room. Otherwise, you'll be subjected to me asking one right at the back there.
Nicola Jopling. Just from a human handling perspective, how did you break through that fear that people have about sort of exposure and the nodding dog and the sort of use of the same old language over and over again? How did you kind of break through that?
It wasn't once, it took a while. It took a lot of convincing, and actually, I would argue, everyone will remain nameless in this scenario, that the non-data people were more comfortable than the data people. Because we're not questioning their understanding, we're not questioning their knowledge, we're just questioning the how they've done it. And anyone that works in data or any other piece, that's quite hard to take a challenge because they are seen as the expert. And we're not challenging their expertise, we're just questioning the why so that we can help them help us.
A really interesting note on which to end. Thank you very much, Alexis.
Thank you.
So we're going to go virtual now for our next speaker, and that is Anna, who hopefully joins us now. Hello, Edinburgh. This is London calling. Can you hear us?
Hello, London. This is Edinburgh. I'm assuming you can hear me and that you can also see my slides.
We can indeed.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Anna Price. I lead the Health and Social Care team at the Office for Statistics Regulation, and I am also a rap enthusiast. Now, I'm not just talking about rap music, although really I'm actually more of a musical theatre person, as you'll see throughout this presentation. I'm also talking about reproducible analytical pipelines. Before I come on to talk about RAP, a quick introduction to OSR. We are the independent regulator of official statistics across the UK, and our statutory remit is to promote and safeguard the production and publication of statistics. We don't produce any statistics ourselves, and we're separate from the Office for National Statistics. Now, everyone working in government has to have a favourite acronym, and underpinning all of OSR's work is ours. And it's the three principles of our code of practice which sets the standards for statistics published by and on behalf of governments. And that's trustworthiness, quality and value, or TQV. And you're going to hear these a lot for the next 6.5 minutes or so, as you will in basically every presentation that we give. I thought it'd be helpful to also define what RAP is. So RAP is about the overall approach taken to carrying out analysis. And in the past, there has sometimes been a misconception that this is just about coding or about automation. And RAP absolutely does involve both of those things, but it's a lot more than that too. It's really a set of principles which ensure that analysis is reproducible, auditable, efficient, and high quality. So if you're a visual person, you can imagine introducing RAP to a traditional analytical process to be a bit like moving from the picture on the left to the picture on the right. If you're someone who likes a list, then I've got you covered here too. So as well as using code and automation to carry out analysis, a RAP will involve things in the list on the right, like peer review, code management, and publishing code. Now, when people hear our name, they sometimes assume that we just work on official statistics, but actually we're really interested in other types of data and analysis too. And a couple of examples of our work in this area are some guidance that we published recently on developing and using models in government, introduced in a really excellent blog that I've linked to here by my colleague Emily. And we're also carrying out a project at the moment looking at data sharing and linkage across governments. And our interest in RAP also fits into this area. And that's because RAP is really much wider than just official statistics. The principles of RAP are applicable to any type of analysis. We became aware of RAP at OSR shortly after the first development of one in 2017, and we've been championing its use ever since. But we also knew through our regulatory work that some producers were facing challenges implementing the approach. So last year, we published a review which explored the current use of RAP principles across the UK's statistical system. And what we wanted to do was identify what enabled successful implementation and to understand what was preventing analysts from implementing RAP principles. And what we found was a bit of a mixed picture. So we found some really excellent examples of RAP, and there are lots of those examples and some case studies in our report. But we also found that overall, the pace of change to adopt RAP principles was slow. And where RAP principles were being used, what we found was that they supported the highest standards of the Code of Practice. So starting with trustworthiness. Trustworthiness really comes from organisations being open. And RAP requires, whenever possible, that code used for analysis is published. This increases transparency, opening up underlying processes and methodologies, showing what was done and why, letting others see how the analysis was made, in other words. It also means that code can have external scrutiny applied to it and be peer reviewed. And even when it's not possible to make code public, an internally hosted platform can be used to share code within an organisation so that analysts can see and learn from each other's work outside of their immediate team. RAP principles help to improve the quality of analysis in a few different ways. So absolutely removing manual processes helps to reduce the risk of errors. But also the approach to code management, so using version control software, means that an audit trail exists. So the progression of the development of code can be seen, who and when were changes made. It also means that you can go back to previous versions of the code if you need to. And finally, value. So value is all about users and making sure that analysis is insightful, useful, and easy to access. And RAP enhances the value of analysis in lots of different ways, but the one that I wanted to pick out today is about enabling reuse of data. So technical users quite often need access to data that's in a simple, unformatted structure and stored in a machine-accessible format. And this is also one of the requirements of a RAP process, which means that the data used in a RAP process can be easily shared and published almost as a byproduct to support those users that want to do their own analysis. And so for all of these reasons and many more, our vision is simple. We want RAP principles to be the default approach to analytical work across government, not just for official statistics, but for other types of analysis too. And our aim is to help support producers in achieving this. And with that in mind, we made a number of recommendations in our 2021 report. Things like developing a consistent shared understanding of what RAP is and what it involves across government, setting a strategic direction for the use of RAP in government, and supporting analysts through increased training and mentoring opportunities. And it's really great to see a huge amount of progress since our report. So the development of a minimum standard of RAP for the analysis function has really helped with that shared understanding of what RAP is. There's been the introduction of new courses on RAP and RAP-related skills. So the example I've got here, I'd really recommend. It's an hour-long introduction to RAP course. So either something to go away and have a look at yourself after this, or something to share with colleagues for a really nice introduction to RAP. And it's great to see wider endorsement for RAP. So earlier in the year, one of the key recommendations in the Goldacre review of health data in England was that RAP should be the standard for all health analysis in academia and in the NHS. But the development that I want to highlight and just finish on is the publication a couple of months ago of an analysis function RAP strategy. And this is a really ambitious strategy that aims to embed RAP as the default approach to analysis in government. And the strategy focuses on 3 goals: tools, capability, and culture, and sets out how that aim will be achieved. It's got some great practical advice for analysts too. We really look forward to seeing further progress on RAP over the next few years, and now I look forward to answering any questions that you have.
Thank you, Anna. Excellent. I'll come to the room again for the first question in a second. Again, if you're watching us online, you can submit questions using Slido, bit.ly/SlidoDB33 if you're not already there. Will has asked a general question, which is, will the slides shown in the 4 presentations be shared after this excellent event? It's very kind. We are very much hoping to publish them, but do get in touch if you want to get hold of the slides as well. So, Anna, we can see you. Excellent. Let me take the first question from in the room, and we've got one down here at the front.
Hello, thanks Anna for that. It's really great to hear. You'd mentioned a little bit the review you'd done to understand the barriers to adoption of RAP, and I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail about what those are and how you're addressing them. And I presume some of it is about that tools, capability and culture work you just referenced, but would you give us a little bit more on that?
Yes, absolutely. So in our report, we kind of break things down into three stages that start with kind of making that initial decision to, whether or not you're going to implement RAP, through to actually building a RAP at the end. So it's kind of a 3-stage process of, yeah, we think this is a good idea. Then, okay, how do we go about planning to achieve this goal, and then the kind of practical implementation of a RAP. And yes, I would say the barriers that we found are kind of similar to those 3 aims that I mentioned in the strategy. So things around culture, needing a kind of supportive, innovative environment, so that people have the kind of time and space and are encouraged to carry out developments, all the way through to the kind of more practical bits at the end, like having the right tools available. And actually, that's a barrier which we've kind of seen decline as a problem over the last couple of years.
Thanks. We've got a few questions coming in online. So one from Anonymous. Picking up on your reference to the Goldacre review, would the OSR have any expectations around one part of the NHS charging other parts of the NHS for access to RAPs? And I suppose there's a broader question there about access to RAPs between different organisations.
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. From OSR's perspective, we really championed kind of free and equal access to data and statistics. So that's, a kind of underpinning principle that we really strongly advocate for. But I guess another part of RAP that speaks to this is the encouragement to publish the code behind a RAP. So there will absolutely be times where the code that's been used to build a RAP can't be published for a kind of security or confidentiality issue. But actually, most of the time what we find is that the reason that code isn't published is that there maybe isn't access to the platform to publish, or there's a bit of nervousness about maybe someone will be really mean about the code that I wrote. And we absolutely get that, and we understand that hesitancy. But the kind of publishing of code where possible and that openness is something that is a really fundamental part of RAP and brings a lot of the benefits that you see using RAP, and like transparency, collaboration.
Great, thank you. I'll come back into the room for the next question. Hands up if you'd like to ask it. Anyone? In which case I will go to my colleague Pritesh, who's asked a question online. Great presentation, says Pritesh. RAP seems eminently sensible. Have you had any pushback? If so, what and why? And if you can say, from whom?
I think we have seen pushback from different places and for different reasons. So I think one example would be the time that it takes to create a RAP. So there is an upfront investment when you build a RAP. And if analysts, as they usually are busy, have a lot of kind of business as usual churn to get through, then it can be really difficult to find that space to make developments. So there can be pushback either from analysts themselves or from managers about the time that it might take. What we've seen is that while there is upfront development time needed, in the long run, you're going to benefit from that. Not just that more efficient process, but all of the other benefits that come from implementing RAP. So that's one example. Other examples maybe would be a kind of nervousness around learning a new skill. And that's really a kind of cultural thing, and bringing people with you so that nobody feels kind of left out or left behind.
Great, thank you. I've got another question online. It's from Bruce Jackson at UKRI. Evening to you, Bruce. The Goldacre Review recommends the application of RAP to health data for research. Do you believe the principles should encompass broader parts of the research landscape? And if so, what do you believe are the challenges to realising this vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd love to see RAP just used for any analysis anywhere. But the challenges will be the same in other sectors as they are in the public sector. And those are the things that I've mentioned around kind of a culture of development and innovation, access to the right tools, skills, training, mentoring.
Great. I'll come back into the room for the next question. Hands up. Yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering, are there any sort of central government evangelists of RAP?
There are many. So there is a central team in the analysis function, which is there to offer support. I think they do offer some kind of mentoring support. That's also the team that created the course that I mentioned in the slides. But they also run what's called the RAP Champions Network, and that's a network across government and across the UK. So yeah, if you're looking to become a RAP champion, then that would be the place to look.
Great. Any more questions in the room? You touched on this at the end of your presentation, Anna, but what are the main changes that have happened since the OSR's report in 2021?
Yes, I think the biggest change is the publication of the strategy. And I think that really matters, because one of the things that we found in our report was that there's only so much that a kind of bottom-up approach to implementing RAP can achieve. So we saw examples where, you'd have really enthusiastic, excellent analysts kind of taking an initiative in their team, introducing a RAP, but then really struggling to get that kind of organisation or department-wide pick up. And what that really needs is the combination of like a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. And so, yeah, I do think that development of a strategy for the analysis function is probably the biggest change and something that's really exciting.
Great. We've got time for a final quick question. Yes.
Are you considering anything around data ethics when you're looking at RAP, or is that just not part of the remit?
I mean, data ethics is definitely something that we're really interested in at OSR, and I guess it probably feels a bit separate because RAP is quite a lot about the process, but it's going to be applicable to any analysis that you do. So I suppose they come hand in hand, and it's something that we definitely are thinking about at OSR generally beyond just RAP.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much indeed. And as Anonymous has just said online, thanks for the Hamilton earworms.
No problem.
I'm glad that you didn't throw away your shot. And I hope that you'll be back to update us on that work at some other point. So, Anna, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Gavin.
Well, that's a wrap for our third speaker, which brings us to our final speaker of the evening, and that is Matt.
Thanks, Gavin. Slides are not yet up, but I don't need them to start with. There we go. So, hi, I'm Matt Curlog. I'm a dataholic, long-time DataBytes fan, but first-time speaker. Until the end of July, I was a senior analyst in the Cabinet Office, but as the Joe Lycett to Gavin's Laura Queensberg, I'm going to mess slightly with the DataBytes format, and rather than talk about a specific project I've been involved in, provide 3 provocations that come from reflecting on my 15 and a half years in government. I can't really come to DataBytes and not have any data, so here's a chart of my life that I made the other day. Still half of it is not actually in work, which is nice, makes me feel young. I also reflected on, connected to the Prime Minister thing, during my career and working, there have been 6 Prime Ministers. There were only 3 when I was a child and at school, so we've had double the number. But my first job was working as a researcher in a consultancy, but largely based in London Borough of Hackney. And then in 2006, I joined government as a civil servant, first in HMRC, then in the Cabinet Office, where I set up a small thing called the Civil Service People Survey. I then took a career break after talking to permanent secretaries about well-being. I needed to do some of my own. Went to the OECD for a little while to talk about public sector innovation, and then came back to the Cabinet Office to my same division, but doing some work on sort of a strategy analysis, and then most recently leading a data innovation team to promote new code-based approaches to analysis. And then in August, I decided to leave the civil service, and I don't really know what I'm doing next. Supposedly I'm being a freelancer. But anyway, but I've always struggled with my professional identity. I'm a geographer, sociologist and statistician by academic training. I joined government as part of the government social research profession, but in the last few years I've been more connected to the data science community. Besides these professional descriptors, they don't really there's probably better words that describe my time in government, be it a survey specialist, a PowerPoint prettifier, or the person that solves coding problems. But there's one common thread, which is that I'm a person that does things with data, more specifically collects and analyzes data, which leads me to the first point I want to make. Data does not equal analysis. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone here. Picking up on the point that Alexis made, the word data means too many things to too many people. And as a result, people talk across purposes when they talk about data in government, especially people who don't have a background in data or analysis. Too often I've heard refrains from non-specialists that if only we get all the data together, get more data, get the right data, we will have an answer to the problem, as though if data in of itself can provide answers. Make no mistake, the increasing availability and fidelity of data is no bad thing in government, but I think that we're at risk of losing an appreciation of 2 very different uses of data in government. Firstly, data for operational delivery of public services, and secondly, data for policy analysis and development. My concern is that as we increasingly digitise services, government's understanding of data is driven more and more by that first purpose, and sometimes forgetting that second bit. That isn't to say we can't or shouldn't make use of new streams of data for policy analysis. There's a slight aberration of this. Dashboards do not equal analysis. An unfortunate side effect of the COVID pandemic is an outbreak in the Cabinet Office, at least, of dashboard fever. Like magpies, senior officials and ministers get distracted by shiny things, and so everything now needs to have a dashboard. And all we need is some weirdos and misfits that can make dashboards showing all the data. We'll be able to manage everything from a single room in Downing Street. Dashboards can be a useful presentation tool. PHE, UKSHA, coronavirus dashboard is an excellent example of this and how to do it right. And better use of more frequent management information for the delivery of public services is a very important evolution, as perhaps is also making some of that information public on something called a performance platform on gov.uk. We might have maybe not had as many problems with passports and driving licenses if we saw the MI from the Passport Office and DVLA. But policy making, while data is necessary precursor, analysis is essential. The rise in dashboards and automated analytics risks minimizing that crucial next step, the need to review, analyze, and distill data into a proper understanding of the policy problem or consideration of potential solutions. Dashboard fever leads to the idea that answers to policy problems are self-evident if only we look at the data. It can lead to us forgetting that data is a social construct. It's not neutral and unbiased. What data we collect and how we collect it is as much a function of specific choices, deliberate or otherwise, as the analysis that we choose to do. And despite the rise of dashboard fever among senior officials and ministers, most analysts still face technological challenges in giving their policy customers interactive outputs. Not only that, also you get a demand for PDF. It doesn't matter that you make a shiny dashboard and they'll still be like, no, I want a PDF because I need to print it out. Alongside technology, another big constraint on analysts is time. Time is the eternal enemy. Some people like to deploy unsubstantiated critiques of civil servants that stereotype them as either lazy or obsessed with Byzantine process and accusing them of not doing any real work. But I don't think it'd be a surprise to this audience for me to say that government analysts don't have enough time to do the things they need to do, let alone the things they'd like to do. As a result, there's a wide uptake of a just bleeping do it, or JFDI mindset, which can be a useful tool in the moment, but we need to think about the negative consequences of constantly operating under a JFDI mentality. It means we put off work with longer-term benefits until a time when the team is less busy. Spoiler alert, you're never going to be less busy. Advances in technology and practice, such as those embodied in the RAP approaches discussed by Anna, mean that there is a pressing need for analytical teams to invest time in proper re-engineering of their processes and workflows, which can't be done on top of or to the side of a day job. It's critical that development activities are seen as just as important as business as usual, and given their own distinct time. Which leads to my third and final point. We need to rethink our approach to L&D. Almost everything I've heard about learning and development in my time in government was focused solely on individual learning. There was rarely a discussion about the development need of teams, and flowing from that, an approach to managing and leading teams that proactively makes time for learning and development. Not just about the team making time for individuals to learn something new, but making time for the team to learn together, to work on a problem together, or to spend time focusing on improving the way they currently do something. There needs to be wider support for innovation time, setting aside time for individuals and teams to explore new things and new approaches. Some of the most useful things I've ended up doing have been because I've done them in my own time, when I've toyed about with something, because in the day job I've just got too many other priorities going on. There also needs to be some thought about supporting mid-career analysts. I know many analysts who are in a similar career point to me, grade 7, leading a team with at least a decade of experience, but they're finding themselves without the coding knowledge and experience of the people they manage. As resources tighten, this will cause problems as and when junior staff leave or get promoted, and critical roles remain unfilled for months or end up being cut. But these team leaders are still tasked with continuing to produce the same level and type of outputs, but because they're now running Python or R, rather than a set of Excel spreadsheets, they don't necessarily have the ability to do them. There are many more things that can and should be discussed in the nexus of data analysis in government. I've got an extra 10 to 50 seconds, so I can say something more. So I'll ad-lib here and say that I think, as I pointed out, technology is another big constraint that, actually, yes, you've got some big places which have silos of fancy cloud technologies and all these sorts of things, but lots and lots of analysts, just all they have on their desktop is Excel, and if they're lucky, access to R, or maybe they've still got SPSS, unfortunately. Anyway, I've used up my 8 minutes, so thank you for listening, and I hope you found it interesting.
Thank you very much, Matt. A final reminder to those of you watching us online, use the Slido, bit.ly/SlidoDB33. And I'm going to start with an online question, actually. This is another one from Anonymous. Thank you for all of your questions this evening, Anonymous. What do you think are the essential qualities of analytical leaders in government?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think one of the important ones is challenge. The best analytical leaders I've seen are about challenge, not just challenging teams to do their best, making sure that they can get through challenging circumstances, but critically challenging policy customers and to refine their ask, to make that to make it clear. Like Claire was saying, clarity is really critical, I think, to trying to get to the bottom of a policy problem and trying to understand sometimes the language of policy is very, fluffy is not the right word, but it can be verbose and it can be very all over the place and critical. Like as an analyst, you want a clear question to answer, and it's about getting that. I think is the most important thing.
I'm getting flashes of Just About Managing from a few years ago.
Yes.
Let's take a question from in the room. Who'd like to ask the first question? Matt, down here.
Thank you. Matt, in your experience of working with government clients and being within government yourself, how do you overcome the problem of people who are politicians wanting to use people like you to make the data say what they want it to say rather than what it actually says?
It's a good one. I don't think I've ever actually I've been myself put in that position of having to say the policy-driven data and policy-driven evidence. Obviously, policy does drive the collection of data and evidence. But I think that's where things like the analysis function, the Government Statistical Services Code of Practice, and these having those foundational things of say, I'm a professional analyst, and these are the cores, and that going back to those things is really critical as a way of defending the integrity of what you do and how you do it.
Thanks. We've got another few questions online. I've got two from Anonymous, so I'll start with one of the Anonymouses. What are the risks of focusing too much on analysis for service delivery rather than analysis for policy development?
I actually don't think we do as much analysis for service delivery as we do for policy analysis. I think that's where, because of the new feeds of data we're getting, because of digitising services, we've actually got an opportunity, and it's really interesting to see things like the work gov.uk have done for recommending content to people who are browsing, etc. I think the issue I was trying to say about data and analysis and the operational sphere is that I think now, because ministers and senior officials are spending so much time in their heads thinking about the delivery of digital services, and quite rightly, because that's a big and important evolution. But both that and analysis both talk about data, but they talk about data in different ways and different frames. And if you're always spending your time talking about data for operations, you can sometimes forget the complexities that are necessary with data for analysis.
Thanks. Let's come back in the room. Right there at the back.
Mary Susan Barry Bays. I'm thinking this is more of a general maybe observation or wanting to hear someone else's viewpoint in a different profession. But if you're within a profession in government, should there be an incentivization or expectation, that you will do CIPD and actually produce your development, your continuing development. And also, could there be an opportunity for career breaks where you are or get a certain level of pay while you go off and do a different bit of study? And it's part of your career progression. And would that stop people getting to at a certain point, and you're doing the same or similar jobs over the last 10 or 15 years, but you don't know where to go next?
Yeah, I think there's a second one, second half of that question. I think, it's really interesting how in academia you have the concept of a sabbatical, and we don't I'm not saying that civil servants necessarily should have sabbaticals, but I do think it's that question about how do you really reframe the journey of learning and development. Supposedly, civil servants have 5 days a year. Just before I left the Cabinet Office, they said, "Oh, you're going to get 10 days a year of L&D." I was like, "I don't use 5, so how am I going to use 10?" So I think there's a real piece there about sort of how you do it through a career that's not just sort of a couple of days here or watching a course, etc. I think there's something really important about that and making space for proper development work that's focused on actually doing a thing, because that's really how you learn. On the first bit around CPD logs, I think I'm not really a fan personally of them. I think they can be valuable and some people will find them useful and they can be very, but I've never found it something I do myself, probably because I'm just a very disorganised person and can't write things down. But I think it's connected to that point around planning, not just planning, but sort of the strategy people have in the way that they manage their team and they make sure that their staff are learning new things and how their team how that's benefiting not just the individual, but benefiting sort of the work that people are actually doing and achieving.
I've got a question there.
Thanks, Matt. The points you made about learning as a team and creating space for thinking about innovation were really insightful, but also fiendishly difficult, given your second point about time being the internal enemy.
Yes.
I know a lot of teams that would really like to do this, but also find it really challenging because it means owning up to not knowing things and not being sure what they can borrow, beg, steal. If you could do one thing to make it easier, what would you do?
I think the part of the reason that teams won't necessarily do some of that is because of this sort of we've got all the day job stuff to do, and so actually I think there's a piece around having the conversation with your policy customers to say actually we as a team to do this better thing that we want to eventually do for you. Actually, we as a team aren't going to be able to do this particular piece of work for this quarter or something. I think so. There's an interesting interplay there because you are providing a service, but if you want to improve that service, actually engage with the users to find out what it is that they want and what might benefit from. But engaging them in that conversation of you as a team developing, I think, is one of the routes I've seen to sort of partly helping achieve some of that.
We've got a similar question from Adam Viles, more online, which is how do we both champion and make time for team development, given you've identified its critical role? Don't know if there's anything else you want to add on that.
I think, well, the further reflection is the sort of, I think it's that usual thing that happens in government is we talk a good game about everything, but actually the reality of practice is very different. That yes, we say we're a learning culture, etc., 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 but actually we aren't. We don't make time. If we were a learning culture, we would prioritise it properly by giving people the time and the space to do it, and saying it is as important as the day job, not the day job. It is part of the day job. It's as important as business as usual.
A final very quick question. Anonymous asks, what is the key data analysis tool you would recommend? And I'd ask a broader question, which is, what would you say to anybody thinking of a data or analysis career in government?
So I think tool-wise, I'd pick up on the point that Anna made about sort of benefiting on open source, and obviously there's sort of, that's particularly R and Python are the two sort of big main tools in that space, but there's Julia and other languages around. But I think that's the critical thing, because there's actually there's so much of a community out there, both in government, increasingly in government, but also out on Twitter. The nicest bit of my Twitter feed is anything to do with R. Not the politics or the journalism or anything else that I follow. And I think as a career in analysis it's really interesting. You get to do some really, really interesting bits and pieces. I think the piece for starting out is trying to work out sort of what you're interested in, which I know is a bit of a cop-out question, but there's a piece around sort of what is it that you like really enjoy doing. Find the bit of that and work into that piece. I'm a person who is interested in how organisations and systems work, which is partly why I ended up in the Cabinet Office at the very centre doing sort of a relatively niche and weird thing, rather than going to do something like climate change analysis or something to do with housing, for example. And so I think there's that piece, and particularly sort of, again, what type of analysis are you interested in? Do you want to make nice, interesting charts that sort of tell stories, or are you much more interested in the sort of the peculiarities of how you collect data?
a perfect note on which to end. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you. A few quick parish notices before I let everyone in the building escape to the free drink and nibbles. Keep an eye on the Institute for Government website, particularly the live blog, for the latest on the current political developments. And remember that the next Data Bites will be happening here on Wednesday, the 5th of October. There are lots of other IFG events coming up, which you can find on the website as well. Levelling Up, public appointments, 4 years on from Carillion. God, is it really that long? The Chair of the National Audit Office in conversation, filmmaker Michael Cockrell, Off-Gem briefing on the energy market. Loads of stuff happening at Labour Conference in Liverpool and Conservative Conference in Birmingham, including around data and the future of government. Cabinet Office as well, CDDO, have their big Data Connect 22 coming up, I think a week full of events coming up later in September, so do check out their website as well. All that is left for me to say is a huge thank you to all of you joining us online, all of you in the audience here in the building as well, and please do join me in a huge round of applause for our fantastic speakers this evening. Thank you very much indeed.